What if WWE bought Impact Wrestling in 2013, at a time when the Aces and Eights ruled the company and TNA's foundation was crumbling from within? But what if, right in the middle of that power struggle, WWE stepped in, acquiring the company and inheriting the storm that came with it? This is WWE versus TNA, Behind Enemy Lines. Behind Enemy Lines opened with immediate consequences. Two championships were unified, and the first point in the WWE versus TNA scorecard was up for grabs. From the outset, this match framed the larger conflict: dominance versus survival. The Shield entered representing WWE's future, physical, relentless, and built to overwhelm. Roman Reigns provided the power, while Seth Rollins controlled the pace, forcing bad influence into constant recovery. WWE's strategy was obvious: pressure early, deny momentum, and make an example out of TNA's tag division. Bad influence approached the match differently. Daniels and Kazarian relied on experience and timing, isolating Rollins when possible and avoiding extended exchanges with Reigns. Their offense wasn't all about force, it was about disruption. Every opening was used to slow the match down and pull the Shield away from their comfort zone. As the match wore on, the contrast became more apparent. The Shield absorbed punishment and kept moving forward, while Kaz and Daniels fought for control in shorter bursts, knowing one mistake could end everything. Both sets of championships remained constantly within reach, but neither team could sustain control long enough to close the match. The finish came when the Shield finally created separation. Roman eliminated Daniels from the equation, leaving Kaz exposed. He then capitalized, securing the pinfall. With that victory, WWE claimed the opening point and unified the tag team championships. More importantly, the message was set early: WWE wasn't here to trade wins, they were here to take control. And with the scoreboard now active, the pressure on TNA only intensified. Match 2 shifted the tone of Behind Enemy Lines. After a physical tag team opener, this contest became about speed and precision. For the first time ever, Rey Mysterio and Austin Aries stood across the ring from one another, two competitors who built entire careers by defying expectations. Despite coming from different systems, the parallels were impossible to ignore. Both men had once reached the top of their respective companies, capturing world championships in divisions that traditionally favored size and power. Neither was supposed to be the guy, yet both forced their way into the main event through innovation and adaptability. Mysterio relied on movement and unpredictability, constantly changing angles and forcing Aries to react. Aries, by comparison, was calculated and methodical, cutting off space, grounding Rey when possible, and turning momentum swings into controlled bursts of offense. As the match progressed, that clash became more pronounced. Mysterio's speed kept the match alive for WWE, but Aries' awareness prevented any sustained comeback. Every opening Rey created was answered with positioning and counter-wrestling from the X Division champion. The finish came when Mysterio attempted to regain momentum, only for Aries to step in at the right moment, lifting Rey and driving him down with the brainbuster. The pinfall followed immediately. With that victory, TNA evened the score. More importantly, Aries proved that the X Division could stand toe-to-toe with WWE's most iconic cruiserweight. The night was no longer tilted in one direction, and the war for supremacy was officially underway. Match 3 stripped away any sense of spectacle and turned the night personal. For Dean Ambrose, this wasn't just another title defense, it was a great opportunity. Throughout his early career, Ambrose built his reputation in the alleyways of wrestling, thriving in environments where violence and unpredictability weren't limitations, but tools. In WWE, that instinct had often been restrained, redirected into something safer and more controlled. Monsters Ball removed those restrictions entirely, and across from him stood the worst possible opponent. Abyss wasn't simply comfortable in this environment, he created it. Monsters Ball was inseparable from his identity, a match type that defined his legacy in TNA. While Ambrose entered looking to reconnect with a part of himself, Abyss entered on familiar ground, carrying years of brutality into the contest. The match quickly reflected that reality. Ambrose battled with desperation and urgency, leaning into his instincts, but every escalation was met by Abyss with experience. Pain didn't slow Abyss down, it simply fueled him. The finish came when Ambrose stopped trying to match Abyss blow for blow. Instead, he found an opening in the moment, pulling Abyss into position and driving him down with dirty deeds. The pinfall followed, sudden and decisive. Ambrose walked away having proven something to himself as much as to WWE, that the part of him built for violence was still there, even against the man most associated with it. For TNA, the loss cut deep. Monsters Ball had been their domain, and this time it wasn't enough. Match 4 became less about competition and more about control. On paper, this was a six-man tag. In reality, it was cult versus club, two groups built on loyalty, fear, and obedience, but driven by very different ideologies. The Wyatt family thrived on isolation and belief, following Bray Wyatt through manipulation and psychological dominance. Aces and Eights, on the other hand, were a gang. Numbers, hierarchy, and influence used as weapons. The Wyatts fought as a unit bound by belief, moving with purpose and cohesion. Aces and Eights never intended to fight clean. From the opening moments, their advantage wasn't strength or chemistry, it was numbers. D'Lo Brown's position at ringside ensured that the match never stayed contained, constantly tipping the balance. As the match progressed, the numbers game became impossible to ignore. Distractions, cheap shots, and interference chipped away at the Wyatts' momentum, forcing them into a fight they weren't allowed to finish on their terms. Every time Bray attempted to regain control, the structure of Aces and Eights closed in around him. The turning point came when the numbers game started to catch up to the Wyatt family. D'Lo Brown caused havoc at ringside while the referee wasn't paying attention, and the leader of the Aces and Eights made his presence felt by taking out Bray Wyatt. With Bray down and the officials overwhelmed, Aces and Eights struck quickly. Anderson capitalized on the disorder, isolating Rowan and securing the pinfall. TNA evened the score once again, but the message was apparent. Aces and Eights weren't here to prove they were better. They were here to prove they were willing to do whatever it took. And in a battle where survival mattered more than honor, that mindset just earned them a massive point. Match 5 was about reflection, past versus future. For years, Bobby Roode's career had followed a familiar outline. His presentation, his pacing, even the way he carried himself as champion, drew constant comparisons to Triple H. During his historic run as the longest reigning TNA World Champion, the label stuck, the Canadian Triple H. It was never meant as an insult. It was recognition of how closely Roode's rise mirrored the blueprint that Triple H had perfected years earlier. That comparison became confrontation. Triple H entered the match as a man winding down his in-ring career, no longer needing to prove his place in history. Roode, by contrast, was still building. With years ahead of him and the possibility of entering WWE's main event scene, this wasn't just about winning, it was about validation. Beating Triple H would mean stepping out of the shadow entirely. The match reflected that dynamic. Triple H relied on experience and control, slowing the pace and forcing Roode to wrestle his match. Roode matched him move for move, not out of imitation, but understanding. He knew this style because it had shaped him. Late in the contest, it appeared inevitable. Triple H set his sights on another pedigree, positioning Roode for what looked like the decisive moment. As he pulled Roode up, the opening revealed itself. The it factor shifted his weight, trapped Triple H, and rolled him up in a sudden counter. It was arguably the biggest victory of Roode's career, not because of how it happened, but because of who it happened against. In one moment, Roode didn't just defeat the man he'd been compared to, he proved he could replace him. With that win, TNA took the lead, and Bobby Roode positioned himself as more than a visitor. He looked like a future main eventer. Match 6 was less subtle than anything that came before it, and it wasn't meant to be. The stipulation alone told the story. An acoustic equalizer match, with the ring surrounded by guitars, felt like a deliberate message from WWE management. Jarrett's career had been inseparable from that image for decades, and here, it was turned into a spectacle at his expense. The rule only reinforced it. No pinfall until every guitar had been destroyed. Jarrett's presence on this card carried weight beyond the match itself. As the founder of TNA and a figure long associated with behind-the-scenes influence wherever he went, Jeff had shaped careers and companies alike. He built TNA, made headline signings like Kurt Angle, and cultivated a reputation as someone who always landed on his feet. On this night, that reputation offered no protection. The match became a prolonged dismantling. Jarrett absorbed the very weapon that once symbolized his power, each guitar shot stripping away any sense of control. Orton, methodical and detached, treated the stipulation not as a joke, but as a process, breaking every guitar one after another, before turning his full attention back to Double J. Once the final guitar was destroyed, the end came quickly. Orton struck without hesitation, dropping Jarrett with a sudden RKO and securing the pinfall. For WWE, it was a necessary response. The scoreboard was level again, and momentum had shifted back. For Jarrett, the symbolism was unavoidable. The founder of TNA, beaten at his own gimmick, on a stage he no longer controlled. Match 7 blurred the line between spectacle and danger. Rampage Jackson's involvement came through business rather than rivalry. His arrival in TNA was tied to Spike TV and Bellator MMA, a cross-promotional move meant to bring legitimacy and mainstream attention. On paper, stepping into an MMA exhibition against Brock looked like a showcase. In practice, it became something else entirely. Once the cage was lowered, the atmosphere changed. Both men leaned into MMA-style offense, strikes, clinches, takedowns, but this was still a professional wrestling environment, and that distinction mattered. Lesnar understood it better than anyone. His experience in both worlds allowed him to control the pace, turning the match into a physical grind rather than a striking exchange. Rampage fought back early, using his power and familiarity with cage combat, but each opening only led him closer to Lesnar's strength base. The match shifted decisively once Lesnar imposed his wrestling. What followed was relentless, repeated German suplexes, each one draining resistance and reminding everyone exactly who controlled the cage. The finish crossed into uncomfortable territory. Lesnar transitioned seamlessly, trapping Rampage's arm and locking in a Kimura that looked less like performance and more like intent. Officials crowded the cage as the hold stayed cinched in. Panic set in as Rampage's arm appeared to give way under the pressure. Rampage tapped. The visual lingered longer than the scoreline. Referees and officials swarmed Lesnar as Rampage was helped from the cage, the tone of the night shifting once again. What was meant to be a promotional exhibition ended as a warning. Brock Lesnar wasn't here to represent WWE. He was here to dominate anyone put in front of him. CM Punk and AJ Styles had crossed paths before, but never under these circumstances. Their last encounters dated back to Ring of Honor, a different era, a different scale. Since then, both men had climbed far beyond that world, redefining what it meant to be the best in their respective companies. This match wasn't about introduction, it was about timing. Punk entered at a crossroads. His first WWE run was nearing its end, and for the first time, cracks were beginning to show. The hunger was still there, but the weight of pressure and conflict followed him into the ring. He wasn't fighting to arrive anymore, he was fighting to hold on. AJ Styles stood on the opposite side of that arc. This was the beginning of something larger. Years of carrying TNA, refining his craft, and waiting for the right moment had led him here. Styles wasn't chasing validation. He was preparing for the biggest run of his career. The match reflected that contrast. Punk relied on instinct, resilience, and experience built from countless wars. Styles wrestled with confidence and clarity, matching Punk step for step while pushing the pace forward. Every exchange felt deliberate, each man aware of the significance beyond the result. As the match reached its conclusion, the balance shifted. Punk fought to regain control, but Styles stayed composed, finding his opening and capitalizing without hesitation. In a moment that felt both decisive and symbolic, Styles lifted Punk and delivered the Styles Clash, sealing the victory. It was a massive win for Styles, not just a point on the board, but a statement. Beating CM Punk on a stage like this confirmed what many already believed: AJ Styles belonged at the very top. And as Punk's first WWE chapter continued to wind down, the spotlight shifted toward the man whose moment was just beginning. Match 9 felt like the true measuring stick of the night. Unlike the earlier singles showcases, this match was about depth. 4 representatives from each company, each chosen to reflect a different pillar of their brand. Power, experience, credibility, and star presence were all accounted for. More than any other match, this one asked which roster was truly stronger from top to bottom. Team WWE brought structure and balance. Kane and Ryback represented raw force. Del Rio added championship pedigree, and Daniel Bryan anchored the team with technical precision. Team TNA answered with identity, Samoa Joe's intensity, James Storm's resilience, Jeff Hardy's unpredictability, and Kurt Angle's unmatched legitimacy. Eliminations came steadily, each one shifting the momentum and narrowing the focus. As bodies fell, the match became less about teams and more about endurance. When the dust settled, only 2 remained. Kurt Angle versus Daniel Bryan. A match that could have headlined on its own suddenly became the deciding moment. 2 of the best technical wrestlers of their generation, connected by history, separated by philosophy. Bryan fought with heart and momentum, pushing the pace and refusing to break. Angle fought with precision and purpose, targeting weaknesses and waiting for the smallest opening. The end came when Angle found it. He wriggled his way out of the yes lock and locked in the ankle lock, sitting deep and cutting off any escape. Bryan resisted, fought, and dragged himself forward, but there was nowhere left to go. Bryan tapped. With that victory, TNA took the lead once again. Angle's win didn't just earn a point. It reinforced everything TNA had built its reputation on. On a night filled with statements, Kurt Angle delivered one of the loudest. Match 10 was built on history rather than momentum. For decades, this was the match the wrestling world believed would never happen. The Undertaker and Sting, 2 icons who defined opposing companies, finally stood across from one another. Not in their primes, and not at the peak of their mystique, but still carrying legacies that demanded attention. By this point in their careers, both men had drifted from the principles that once defined them. The Undertaker's aura had had thinned through overexposure and physical decline, while Sting had moved away from the lone, vigilant presence that once made him untouchable. This wasn't the dream match fans once imagined, but it was still unavoidable. The casket stipulation and no disqualification rules shaped everything. Sting neutralized Undertaker's size advantage early by introducing his baseball bat, a weapon synonymous with his identity. The match became less about dominance and more about survival, with neither man able to impose control for long. The fight spilled out of the ring and up onto the stage, where the atmosphere shifted again. In a moment that felt all too familiar for the night, Aces and Eights struck. Sting was blindsided and left laid out on the ramp, the interruption halting what little momentum the match had built. With Sting incapacitated, The Undertaker took control. He carried Sting back toward ringside, methodically ending the resistance. One tombstone piledriver later, the outcome was inevitable. The scoreboard was level once again, but the aftermath lingered. A match decades in the making ended not with purity, but with interference. A reminder that at behind enemy lines, even legends weren't immune to the war surrounding them. The main event carried a weight few matches ever do. Years earlier, this matchup would have felt impossible. John Cena, the face of WWE, standing opposite Bully Ray, once known primarily as a tag team wrestler, now reborn as the ruthless president of Aces and Eights. That transformation changed everything. Bully Ray wasn't just representing TNA, he was leading its most powerful faction, controlling outcomes, and reshaping his legacy in the process. Both championships were on the line, and with them, the fate of an entire company. The match itself was physical and exhausting, driven more by attrition than spectacle. Bully fought like a man who knew what was at stake, leaning into punishment and control. Cena answered with endurance, absorbing damage and refusing to stay down. There was no momentum swing without consequence. Every exchange felt final. Eventually, the resistance broke. Cena trapped Bully Ray in the STF, wrenching back as Bully fought and clawed for escape. With nowhere left to go, Bully Ray tapped out. WWE had won the war. Cena left the ring with both championships. The outcome decided. Bully Ray remained behind, motionless, the weight of defeat settling in. It felt like the end, but it wasn't. The silence broke as Aces and Eights emerged from the crowd surrounding the ring. There was no urgency, only disgust. The body language said everything, especially from Devon. One by one, they entered the ring, and then they turned on Bully Ray. A 4-on-1 ambush followed, dismantling the man who had led them. As Bully lay broken, the group signaled toward the entrance. The sound of a motorcycle cut through the arena. The Undertaker arrived. He rode to the ring wearing Aces and Eights branding. The realization hit immediately. Bully Ray hadn't just lost his titles, he'd lost his position. The Undertaker had replaced him as president of Aces and Eights. The message was finalized when Undertaker lifted Bully Ray and delivered a tombstone piledriver through the commentary table. The new-look Aces and Eights stood tall over the wreckage as the show went off the air. But as the dust settled, one question remained unanswered. What happens now?